But now I think we can bring in Luca. I get so much email from Luca. I was wondering if he actually exists. It was such a pleasure to meet him during rehearsals last week. I really, you're even lovelier in person than you are in my inbox. So thank you for joining this. Thanks for all you do for the platform engineering and for building these communities. Really appreciate it. So we're going to give you a minute to talk about it. But you're on mute.
We're fighting.
Okay.
We're fighting behind the scenes.
I'm so fighting. I think with somebody unmuting me. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here and talk a little bit about platform engineering. I have a bit of a different angle today. Can everybody see my screen? Yeah,
we can, and we're gonna duck out.
Sweet. Okay, sweet. I'll dive right into this. So yeah, I mean, like it was said, I do. I talk to a lot of people about platform engineering, and I'm a core contributor in the platform engineering community, platform con, lots of platform engineering. But as I said, today I wanted to take a bit of a different angle. I spent the last few weeks kind of studying industrial revolutions, don't ask me why. And I thought it'd be fun to do some pattern recognition here, because I think there are some very interesting parallels that we can actually draw between industrial revolutions in the past and sort of like the current knowledge work industrial revolution / digital revolution that I think we're kind of living through right now. And see if there's like any interesting learnings that we can get there. So it's a bit of an experiment, but stick with me and see if hopefully we all learn something. First, obviously, I wanted to take a look at industrial revolutions. And I think there is an interesting sort of rhythm that you can see, that we can see kind of going from this like technological innovations to sort of like the social organizational response to them. And obviously, I should say, the steam engine, I think, is if you open any history book, you'll see it's kind of the moment that is officially recognized by most historians as the beginning of the first industrial revolution. Electricity, absolutely not, is an arbitrary choice of mine. And there are many, many, many more technologies like the condenser and many other things along this continuum, of course. But just for the sake of the argument, I think this makes enough sense. So obviously, in the 1700s, right, we have this like kind of steam engine moment that sort of triggers this organizational change, which specifically is, if you really think about it, it's kind of like there were a lot of different artisanal shops all over, and then the first factory starts popping up. And so it's really kind of this like geographic, almost like pull, centralized pull on putting more people into like bigger buildings, essentially. And then in the second industrial revolution, actually what we see is sort of like a similar thing, but where we upgrade factories with assembly lines. And I believe this is really the key qualitative differentiation here. If we look at kind of like the first and the second revolution here, and sort of factory 1.0 and 2.0, where the 1.0 is still kind of this we're figuring it out, right? So like there's this huge technological change, mostly triggered by the steam engine, like we said. But then the sort of organizational innovation and response is still not really fully in sync, and kind of figured out how to make the most of this technology, right? So I graphed this like very precise thing in the background, which is, I don't know, it could be social economic impact, whatever, right? But you have this kind of like first sort of bump in growth, but it's really with the assembly line, right? And like Taylorism, Fordism, and kind of like all this sort of like software, right? Like ideological software almost, that allowed us to use the hardware the best possible way, and that essentially creates this inflection point, which is really the moment where mass production sort of like gets adopted all over the Western Hemisphere and then all over the world, and not just mass production, but also mass adoption actually of these technologies, right? And of factories all over, right? And so it's really this kind of like finding the right balance between technology and organizational that unlocks the sort of social technical innovation. And another way you can look at it, I think, is this sort of like light cones, I guess, of different technologies that keep growing, and keep adding, and the respective organizational innovations that then culminate with this kind of like social technical overlap, right? Now, I think so you see, I think where this is going, but the interesting thing is, I think we can apply a similar sort of pattern recognition, I think, to today's knowledge work industrial revolution, or digital industrial revolution. Obviously, we've had, again, here totally arbitrary picks, right? But we've had CPUs, mainframe, SaaS cloud, whatever you want to pick there, right? And then we've had a bunch of organizational responses to those technologies to figure out how we can make the most out of them, right? The first kind of such response has been waterfall, which, as a little trivia, was developed for the Apollo program, actually, as a way of decoupling the way we engineer software from the way we engineer hardware. So in the early days of the Apollo program, which was like 10 plus years, essentially they were trying to keep software on the hardware schedule. And then a few of the initial kind of pioneers there were kind of like, no, I think we need like a different system, and came up with waterfall instead. And that was the first such example of like, okay, we have this new technological innovations of combination of hardware and software, and how can we actually make them work better for us, right? Then after that, sort of agile, Scrum, Lean, OKRs, like a lot of these concepts that have actually been borrowed by industrial revolutions, whether it was the kind of like Taylorism and Fordism current, or the Japanese current after that, right? And then the latest iteration of that, especially I think is relevant in our IT industry, is DevOps, of course. And so I thought it would be interesting if we actually zoom in on DevOps, right? DevOps, I think you can draw a pretty good parallel with the first factories without assembly lines, right? So obviously DevOps, right, was created in reaction of this throwing over the fence between application developers and sysadmin, I guess, at the time, right? It's like, hey, off you go. This is your problem now to figure out how to run these applications, right? On top of like a very complex network of servers that you're actually physically buying and physically networking and maintaining, right? And so this is when Mr. over here, Werner Vogelskamp, comes around in 2006 and famously yells on stage, "You build it, you run it," when they announced AWS. But really, if you think about this idea of you building, you're running it, right? It is kind of like, okay, you have a bunch of artisans in this like factory 1.0, kind of doing the entire full stack thing without a clear separation of concerns and specialization along a sort of like software assembly line, right? And I think this is where the parallel becomes very interesting. Now, of course, since 2006, right, there's been a huge kind of like industrial scale moment of software engineering, right, where most engineering organizations went 10x in size, if not 100x in some cases, like actually in the case of Amazon. And also, obviously, we saw this explosion in complexity of setups, of cloud native tool chains, and so on. And this is kind of where DevOps, as an organizational innovation and as kind of like organizational software and methodology, no longer has been able to really keep up in this large enterprise to make sure that we make the most of these technologies. And so this is, I think, really how you can see, I think, like an interesting lens through which you can look at platform engineering as really the socio-technical kind of innovation moment of today's knowledge work industrial revolution, right? And you can actually apply the same sort of lens that we looked at earlier, right, where we have these technological innovations, right, in this technical innovation light cone and respective organization innovation. You would have probably like waterfall over here, and then so on. And then platform engineering is kind of this social technical overlap that tries to balance both the technological, but crucially also the cultural components, right? To really make sure that we can make the most of these technologies and really have the biggest possible impact on enterprises and therefore on society, right? And so this is where, I think you can again map similarly sort of agile, Scrum, DevOps, that were kind of like this initial bump, right? But that sort of like fell short of the initial promise because of shifting left onto developers and kind of rejecting specialization and sort of separation of concerns to an extent, is essentially rejecting assembly lines and the kind of factory 2.0 that is actually what makes things scalable. And Danielle, you mentioned Kelsey just a moment ago. This is, I think, it was a very interesting conversation that we had at Platform Con, I think last year, not this year, where we basically had a Q&A with people that got quite heated around a comment that Kelsey made of this idea of like silos are good now, with the caveat of like if there's like a good platform in between, right? But it's almost like silos has become like a bad word, right, in our industry, of like, no, everything, everybody needs to do everything, we don't want any silos and so on. Silos, specializations are actually a good thing, alongside other, again, if you have like a good platform in between these silos, right, that helps them communicate, but that also helps them and enables them to actually specialize further, right? And another sort of key term and key pillar that we talk a lot about in platform engineering, the platform engineer community, is golden paths, right? Beyond developer self-service, platform as a product, and a bunch of other sort of crucial ideas there. But golden paths are really nothing else but modern assembly lines, essentially, right? For your software factory. And so this is where I believe platform engineering can really be and has already been this kind of like inflection point for the way we build and ship software in the enterprise, especially, right? And I think the interesting thing is you can now overlay here also GPUs and LLMs, right? Like at the end of the day, GPUs are actually just sort of like an incremental innovation on top of CPUs, right? Which then combined with LLMs are really sort of the steam engine moment of today's kind of like knowledge work industrial revolution, right? And I think that the interesting thing here is that unlike what we've seen here, right, where it's kind of like, okay, we have this initial bump and then we really figure things out and we hit the real inflection point, we have the opportunity here, because platform engineering is sort of the inheriting all these best practices, all the way from waterfall to Scrum to DevOps and then to platform engineering.
Luca, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up though, because we're over
I'm wrapping
time.
up. This is the last slide. But yeah, this is really the point, right? Like this is the steam engine moment, and platforms are, the key enabler that I think allows us to really deliver on the promise of AI and agents and so on in the enterprise. And that's it.
We appreciate you, Luca, but you have a whole conference that you get to talk about this stuff with. So this was supposed to be a teaser, but thank you very much for being here. And for those that don't know Luca, you can find him at what's the name of the big event that you're running?
PlatformCon. PlatformCon.com. You can go